Hey guys, hope you're doing okay. It's week 3 of this whole distance learning thing, and hopefully you're getting acclimated and have figured out some sort of schedule or routine that makes sense for you. I know I definitely am getting to that point, and hopefully you're enjoying some of the extra time off that you're getting too. We're going to be finishing of Mice and Men this week, and before that, I think it's important to just go over the last 2 chapters, make sure you understand everything that's happened so far, so that you feel comfortable getting into the last 2 chapters this week. A lot of you guys already finished chapter 4. Great job. Good job being on top of it. Let me just summarize chapters 2 and 3 very briefly for you, real quick here. All right. So George and Lenny arrive at the ranch that they're supposed to help at. They've made their way from Weed to Salinas, and they're a little late because they spent the night in the woods. They were dropped off a little too early by the bus they were on, so they were walking, and they decided to stop and enjoy the night in the woods. Anyway, arriving late, the first person they meet is Candy. He is the old swamper, as they call him on the ranch. Candy, again, this old man, he is not really a active farmhand anymore, because he is missing a hand. After meeting Candy, they meet the boss, and the boss never really has a name. Maybe that's intentional. He's just kind of this overarching, like, business type figure, doesn't do any of the hard work for himself. And this guy starts questioning George about his relationship with Lenny. Like, why are you going around with this guy? Are you taking his paycheck? Are you taking advantage of him? And George has to defend his relationship with Lenny, but we don't, where it's not revealed to us just yet why these two guys traveled together, why they're friends. After meeting the boss, they meet the boss's son, Curly. And Curly is kind of this really little guy. He is a jerk because he's so little, I guess. He has little man syndrome, as they call it. And he immediately, upon seeing Lenny, wants to fight Lenny because he sees this much bigger guy. That little man syndrome informs him, like, this guy thinks he's better than me. Lenny doesn't. Lenny's not thinking about that at all. But anyway, he takes issue with Curly, and George, seeing this, decides to remind Lenny, like, hey, we're going to run into some trouble here on this ranch, or, if we do run into trouble, don't forget what I said. Don't forget where we're supposed to go or where you're supposed to go should things go south, right? Lastly, the prince of the ranch, aka Slim, comes in and introduces himself. And Slim is very well respected. He's referred to as the prince of the ranch, even though he doesn't own the ranch in any way. He's not, like the boss's son, like Curly is. He's just a really nice guy. He's the leader of all the ranch hands, kind of. He's like the most well-known worker on the ranch, and everyone just respects the guy. He's just a man's man kind of man type deal. Anyway, Slim, in talking and introducing himself to George and Lenny, he reveals that he just had a litter of puppies. And so, not like him, literally, his dog had a litter of puppies. And so George and Lenny, or Lenny freaks out at this, and Lenny's like, you think I can have one of those puppies? And that's kind of where we leave off with chapter 2. So that was a lot of just character introduction. That's why there wasn't really any reason to do a close analysis of it. Chapter 3 introduces a lot more, right? So we fast forward a little bit. There's been a full day of work at least. I don't know how many days it's been necessarily. It sounds like it's the first day because as George and Slim are walking back into the ranch from a day of working in the fields, Slim is kind of saying, wow, that Lenny guy, you weren't joking around. He can really, he can buck some barley. Slim is suspicious. He's like, that guy does a lot of work. What do you contribute to that relationship? And George, again, has to defend that relationship he has with Lenny. And he, to Slim, who is a lot more personable, he reveals some of the truth, right? And we learn that in the past, Lenny and George, as younger men, maybe even kids, George and his friends used to bully Lenny. And it's unfortunate, but one time George tells Lenny, like, hey, why don't you go jump in the lake and, see if you can swim. And Lenny, of course, jumps in, can't swim. George has to eventually go in there and pull him out. After him and his friends had a laugh for a while, George realizes, oh, this is serious, saves Lenny, and instead of being upset at him, Lenny is super grateful to George, right? He doesn't even like fathom or he isn't cognizant of the idea that George is the one that asked him to save him. He just sees the fact that George saved him. So Lenny and George are kind of inseparable from that point on. That's what George tells Slim. Where the chapter continues and George begins to play solitaire. And it's one of the few card games that a person can really play by themselves. There was some confusion. They play euchre or euchre, I don't know how to say it, but they play that later on when Carlson, one of the other ranch hands, asks to play it. But don't make any mistake, it's symbolic that George is playing solitaire because, again, it's a game that he plays by himself. And so maybe this is speaking to the idea that even though George and Lenny travel together and are friends, which is uncommon, George's true nature and the true nature of every man is to ultimately be by himself. As George is playing solitaire, Lenny sneaks in with one of the puppies and tries to go to sleep holding the puppy. And of course, George catches him. Lenny's like a kid, right? And this little pup is contrasted, kind of, brings up a conversation of dogs inside the men's boarding room there. And everyone turns their attention to Candy's dog. Remember Candy, the swamper, right? The guy who's missing a hand. And Candy's dog is way past its working years. It's old, it's all lumpy, it smells, right? It can barely walk, it just kind of sits around all day. And if you think that sounds like I'm describing Candy, yeah, I pretty much am. Candy and his dog are synonymous with one another, right? They're both old, they're both past their prime time working years. And so it's no, accident when we see how the people or how the other workers treat Candy's dog. It kind of says or shows us if the humanity of, or I guess if the morals of Candy being a human man, weren't there, we would treat him just like they treat his old dog. So what they do to his dog is one of the other ranch hands, Carlson, he says, Candy, let me take your dog out back and let me just put it out of its misery. It's not doing any good to anybody. It smells. It just takes up space. It doesn't work anymore. Let me just put it out of its misery. And Candy, he can't bring himself to allow Carlson to do that. And he turns to Slim and he's like, well, what do you think? Let me read the scene to you, actually. Let's read it together so you can get a clearer idea of what's happening here. So I'll go ahead and put the text up on the screen and you can just follow along that way. It's probably easier than pulling up the PDF, right? So Carlson stopped and sniffed the air and, still sniffing, looked down at the old dog. God almighty, that dog stinks. Get him out of here, Candy. I don't know nothing that stinks as bad as an old dog. You gotta get him out. Candy rolled to the edge of his bunk. He reached over and patted the ancient dog, and he apologized. I've been around him much, and so I never notice how he stinks. Well, I can't stand him in here, said Carlson. That stink hangs around even after he's gone. He walked over with his heavy-legged stride and looked down at the dog. Got no teeth, he said. He's all stiff with rheumatism. He ain't no good to you, Candy, and he ain't no good to himself. Why don't you shoot him, Candy? The old man squirmed uncomfortably. Well, hell, I had him so long, had him since he was a pup. I herded sheep with him, he said proudly. You wouldn't think it to look at him now, but he was the best damn sheepdog I ever seen. George said, I seen a guy in Weed that had an Airedale could herd sheep, learned it from other dogs. Carlson was not to be put off. Look, Candy, this old dog just suffers himself all the time. If you was to take him out and shoot him right in the back of the head, he leaned over and pointed, right there, why he'd never know what hit him. Candy looked about unhappily. No, he said softly. No, I couldn't do that. I had him too long. He don't have no fun, Carlson insisted, and he stinks to beat hell. Tell you what, I'll shoot him for you. Then it won't be you that does it. Candy threw his legs off the bunk. He scratched the white stubble whiskers on his cheek nervously. I'm so used to him, he said softly. I had him from a pup. You ain't being kind to him keeping him alive, said Carlson. Look, Slim's dog got a litter right now. I bet Slim would give you one of them pups to raise up. Wouldn't you, Slim? The Skinner had been studying the old dog with his calm eyes. Yeah, he said. You can have a pup if you want to. He seemed to shake himself free for speech. Carl's right, Candy. That dog ain't no good to himself. I wish somebody'd shoot me if I get old and a cripple. And maybe he doesn't realize, but he's literally calling out Candy right in that moment, because not only is he describing Candy's dog, he just described Candy, right? Candy is old and crippled, and so he's saying, just kill me if I get to the point that you're at, right? The dog eventually does get killed, right? Carlson takes it out back and shoots it in the head. We're not privy to that scene, thankfully, but it tells us what society essentially does to people who are disabled in some way, or people who are too old to contribute to the working class anymore, right? We just cast them aside and we say, you might as well be dead. It's dark, but, that's the commentary Steinbeck wants to leave with us. During this whole episode, or in between it, the men see the name of an old colleague in a magazine and are kind of in awe of it. This was one of the questions on the Microsoft forum, and in this scene, really, as they're looking at this magazine, it's it's not even significant, right? It's like, in magazines, sometimes they have that section where you can submit questions. I don't know when the last time you opened a magazine is, but literally all that it is one of the guys who used to work on the ranch had submitted a question to a magazine. And it's not like a big time magazine or something. It's like Farmers Weekly or something like that. I don't know what it was, but he just had a question for the editor of this really small time magazine, and all the guys in the ranch are looking at it and they're like, wow, look it, he made it, right? Did he really make it? No, not at all. But the idea that someone could reach a much more national acclaim or a wider audience outside of this small town in California, it stuns them. And so it speaks again to the impossible nature of the American dream, right? Like, to have your name be printed down somewhere and remembered, that seems impossible. Eventually, like, everyone kind of clears out except for George and Lenny and Candy. Candy's just kind of in the corner crying. His dog had just been shot. And George and Lenny, pay him no mind, and they start talking about their dream a little bit more. And so, as they're talking about their dream, Candy overhears them, and he gets a little excited because he has had enough of this place, right? He sees what they do to people like him. They shoot him in the head, right? Not literally, but like symbolically. And so he's like, I gotta get out of here. And when he hears that there's a way out, the George and Lenny have a dream that they're pursuing. He says, you know what? I want to come with you guys. I've got money saved up. We could buy some land right now. We could go and do this right now. So I want to read this scene to you one more time so you can get a sense of what Candy's really realizing here. A lot of people are confused, like, why did Candy all of a sudden decide to join in with these guys? Is it because he was just mad at everyone else? No, it's because he realizes the dream that these guys have to settle down somewhere and to just have a place of their own, free from the expectations of society. That's something that appeals to him very much, considering what's just happened to him. So let me pull that scene up for you real quick. Candy sat on the edge of his bunk. He scratched the stump of his wrist nervously. I got hurt 4 years ago, he said. They'll can me pretty soon. Just as soon as I can't swamp out no bunkhouses, they'll put me on the country. Maybe if I give you guys my money, you'll let me hoe in the garden, even after I ain't no good at it. And I'll wash dishes and little chicken stuff like that. But I'll be on our own place, and I'll be let to work on our own place. He said miserably, you seen what they done to my dog tonight? They say he weren't good to himself nor nobody else. When they can me here, I wish somebody'd shoot me. But they won't do nothing like that. I won't have no place to go, and I can't get no more jobs. $30 more coming, time you guys is ready to quit. So Candy kind of spells it out for us right there, and again, a depressing viewpoint on the American dream, but when he sees this possibility of redemption, he jumps on it. And George, seeing the potential of that, of how much Candy can contribute financially to the situation, he's like, oh my gosh, we can actually do this. Lenny and I have just been talking about it for so long, but with Candy's help, it seems like it might just happen. Then, after that, all the guys come rushing back in, and they're in some sort of argument. Curly is yelling at Slim because he's suspicious that Slim is sleeping around with his wife. Ultimately, Lenny starts smiling because and laughing. He is still riding the high of talking about tending to rabbits with George and Candy, and he's so happy that the dream is going to happen. And with that smile on his face, Curly looks over and sees Lenny smiling and says like, "Hey, what's your problem?" The two get into it. They fight, and Lenny crushes Curly's hand.
But he didn't do nothing. Come on, leave him alone. Cut it out, Curly. Come on, Lenny. Fight back. Get him, Lenny. Hit him back. Fight back. Come on. Get him, Lenny. Get him. Slim, help me. Lenny. Let go his hand. Come on, let go. Jesus. You told me to, George. You told me to.
Now we have a pretty big predicament because obviously it's going to be hard to explain that away. Why did Curly's hand break? And that introduces one of the key pieces of conflict heading into chapters 4 and 5. Something to watch for in chapter 4 primarily is Steinbeck's going to focus in on the 4 people who face discrimination on the ranch, right? Candy, who is old and disabled. Lenny, who is mentally disabled. Curly's wife, who is a woman, and Crooks, who is both black and disabled in some way, right? So the question I want you to ponder as you read the next chapter, as you are reminded of who these people are and the difficulties they face in achieving their pursuits, is, who has it the roughest? Not that it's like a competition, but just if you could illustrate American society as a ladder, right? Who's on that bottom rung? Who has the most difficult time achieving their dream? Who faces the most hurdles? And, this argument can change day by day. Put it in context of what's happening in the novel, too. Who do you think ultimately has the biggest hurdle to overcome? All right, so that's it for chapters 2 and 3. Hopefully that helped clear things up for you guys a little bit. If you have any questions, as always, there's the questions channel, or shoot me an email, Remind, Twitter, whatever it may be. Cool. Have a good week, you guys. Check back in on Wednesday for your chapter 5 materials. There will be a discussion board on Wednesday as well for the conclusion of the novel. And again, next week we'll get into a bit longer writing response, and from there we will get into Gatsby. All right? Cool.